intended to reason at every hour so that they are not lost. Because we understand that toward the end of time, Jehovah God, there will be deception. But we are asking that you alone may help us to make sure that we do not find ourselves among those who are deceived. We say thank you because, Heavenly Lord, you have heard our prayers. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Do we have anything special? We can all put our phones on silent. Yeah, it's time for us to listen to the word of the Lord. Depression,
Good evening, Church of God. Okay, today marks the first day of our lesson, our series of lessons on the mind. And the theme is deception zone. I struggled to come up with a theme. I had a lot of conflicting titles that all sounded to, hit the nail on the head. But at the end of the day, I settled for this one after praying about it and consulting from some of my trusted friends. So the theme is deception zone. We all know what deception is. We know what it means to deceive. I think some of us have even been deceived before. Then there's that word zone that's a noun, you may say. It's naming a certain place or an area. So the theme itself entails that, or it suggests that there is a zone in which deception is happening. And to all of us who have been learning some lessons for some time now, we understand the idea of the great controversy and so on and so forth. So we are going to focus on the mind primarily because the mind is, as the theme for today suggests, the center of everything. So it's the seat of judgment, it's where wars are fought, it's where battles are lost, it's where battles are won. So that's what we are going to focus on, the mind. We're going to go through a series of lessons. Day 2 is going to focus on music, where we'll explore the different genres of music, from the likes of hip-hop to soul-soothing acapellas and different types of music. And then we'll see why the Bible is so particular about music. Day 2 is going to be, day 3 is going to be the effect of food on the mind. Does food have any effect on the mind? We're going to proceed from there. Day 4 is going to be now on sports, different types of sports. How do they affect the mind? So as you can see, everything is leading to the mind. We are going to follow that up with a lesson on decolonizing the mind. It's something that most of us, especially those of the African race, have suffered from, I think, for all our lives. Most of us have not really known what true freedom is. Then day 6, which will be Friday, if the Lord allows, we're going to discuss the theme, desexualizing the mind. And after going through all these, Sabbath will be on sanctifying the mind. The idea of why then is it difficult for us to have sanctified lives. That's the general theme, the general outline, rather, of the week of prayer. I like the song we used. It's a very deep prayer. Jesus, lover of my soul, let me fly to your bosom. It's someone who has realize their sinfulness, and then they know that they don't have anything in them to help them overcome sin. But there are a few specific lines that stood out for me. There is a line in verse 2 that says, "Cover my defenseless head with a shadow of your wing." It's a very profound plea, in my view, to ask God to say, my head is defenseless. And I think that ties into what we're discussing. And therefore, I request you to cover it with a shadow of your wing. That's what we will do throughout the week. The theme for today is the mind, the center of everything. And our main text of consideration throughout the week and for today is Proverbs 23 verse 7, which I think is a memory verse for some of us. Whatever a man does what? Whatever a man thinks in his heart, so is he. I cut it short because it's a bit long. When you proceed, it says he may say something and then he ends up doing something else. But the only way to know what a person really is or who a person really is what they think. Now, Solomon here is making a very profound statement that he, if you look at this text in isolation, you will fail to understand because he does not seem to provide any evidence to substantiate his claim here. But a closer look at the entire Bible reveals to us that the heart really is the center of everything. If we go to Jeremiah, he tells us that the heart is what? Deceitful above all things, which ties into what we're discussing here because, by the way, mind and heart in biblical terms are synonymous, so we can say heart, mind remain the same thing. So Jeremiah then takes it a step further and says, the heart is deceitful above all things. And then he goes on to say it's desperately wicked. It's interesting to tell someone that you are wicked because it suggests that they've done some really bad things. But if you add the word desperately to it, you are describing the level and type and grade and stage of their wickedness. So it tells us that all our hearts are desperately wicked. They are unsatisfied until they have committed wickedness. So why is Jeremiah saying that? The Bible seems to be so concerned with the mind, this theme of the mind. When we go to Philippians, he's saying, let this what? This mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So then here we have two minds or types of minds that have been juxtaposed and placed in front of us, and then we are asked to, compare and contrast. Those types of questions that come and then they say compare and contrast the upper GI and the lower GI, and then you start explaining. So here it seems to be saying you have this heart of man, and then you have this heart of Jesus Christ, and then he's saying let the mind of Jesus Christ be in you. By Sabbath, God willing, we are going to see why Paul chose this type of wording to say let the mind of Christ be in you. If you go to Romans 12, he continues and actually says something very profound. He says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your what? Of your mind. So Paul here is talking about a very interesting terms, at least in psychological and psychiatric cases, even neurology, to say that the heart can actually be done what? It can be renewed. That's what he is saying. In neuropsychology, psychiatry, we use a different term, neuroplasticity. That's the idea that the brain is like a plastic. It can be changed into something else. So he's saying, be you renewed, be you transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then when you go to Peter is quite interesting, where he now pictures the mind as if it's in a state of war, where he says, wherefore get up the loins of your what? Of your mind. The picture he's painting here is that of a warrior who, in ancient times, the Romans and the other ancient civilizations would wear a robe, and then they would wear their helmet, they would have a shield and their sandals. But the robe had to be girded up. It's like a dress that has a belt here, and then you have to tie it. So Peter is picturing the mind as if it's in that state, and then he says, the way you tighten your belt is the way you should tighten the loins of your mind. Then he goes ahead to say, be sober and hope, and then he continues to talk about other things. Why do you need to get up the loins of your mind? Of course, when you compare it to Solomon, Proverbs 23 verse 7, you start seeing why it should be gathered up, because whatever a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So, with that foundation in mind, do we have any examples from science that can back some of these things and that can at least help us understand why the Bible is so much focused on the mind? If we go back to the 1800s, we'll find a very curious case of a gentleman called Phineas Gage. This gentleman was about 25 years old at the time. He was a railroad worker. So, you know, when you're building, even just roads, if you've passed through the Great North Road as they are trying to widen it to become a dual carriageway, you find that hills are supposed to be what? To be removed, and then valleys are supposed to be filled. So as they are laying the tracks for where to put the rails, as they are constructing that, sometimes they encounter hard rocks. So it was his duty to go to a place, and then they would put in dynamite, you know, dynamite or gunpowder and things like that. But the procedure is so delicate that you have to dig a very small hole, put in gunpowder, and then you have to pack it with sand. And then you have to walk a certain distance, and then it has to be ignited. Then it explodes. Then after that explosion, they would go and clear, and then the tracks are going to be laid. He was a very, you know, he was a gentleman, responsible, hardworking. He was smart. But one day, a very unfortunate event happened. Someone, perhaps it was him or it was someone else, forgot to pack it properly, such that they put in the gunpowder, but they forgot to put in the sand. So as he was going in to you know, compact it with an iron rod, it exploded right there. So as it exploded, the same iron rod that he's having was projected. It entered through the side of the head, pierced inside, and then it came out on the other side. Okay? So it was a very terrible accident, an explosion, then he falls down to the ground lifeless. He was bleeding profusely, and a lot of things happened. But it so happened that after they took him to the hospital, he survived. Actually, you can even see his skull. It's been displayed. It's there in different. I'm sure they've even made copies of it, but it's there on display because psychiatry has been very interested in it. But something profound happened after that accident. He was a different person. He became rude. He became impatient. He became irresponsible. The total opposite of what he was before the accident. So upon further analysis, they found that the reason he survived was the brainstem. You know, the brainstem is the region of the brain that's responsible for controlling autonomic activity. You know, the reason you don't even think about controlling the heartbeat. Do you know how, you know, cumbersome it would be if you had to control your heartbeat every time? If it was up to you to control the rate at which your heart is beating. So that is not a function of the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe does with judgment and thinking and all that. The brainstem is now responsible for controlling your breathing rate. It's responsible for controlling your digestion. It's responsible for controlling your heart rate. That's why if you get a bleed in the brainstem, even if you're in the US, you're not going to survive, because all that autonomic activity is going to be shut down. But for him, if you can show the previous slide, if you see the way it entered, the brainstem is spared. The main organ or part of the brain that was affected was the frontal lobe. Why then did he have this type of change afterwards? So he survived. We know why he survived, because the brainstem was still intact, but there was that change. Okay, there's that line at the bottom. You can show the next slide. That says this area, the frontal lobe, controls behavior and what? And decision making. That's the part of the brain that was damaged. in his case. The doctor who was attending to him, Dr. Harlow, wrote this to say, Gage was fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, meaning you can think of why me and multiply maybe by 10, the level of insults that were coming from. Just imagine. Which was not previously his custom, meaning prior to that he was a very calm gentleman. He became impatient of restraint or advice when it conflicted with his desires. So that's a very important statement. So when you're advising him and your advice conflicted with his desires, he didn't want to listen to anything like that. He's described as being a child in his intellectual capacity. Now imagine a 25-year-old being described as a child in intellectual capacity and manifestations. Dr. Harlow described him as having the animal passions of a strong man. Now, if you look at mammals, the only thing that distinguishes us, you and me, from a dog is that our frontal lobe is large. Okay? It's able to help us reason through things. So for him, when it was taken away, the only thing that was leading him now was the limbic system, which we're going to see later. Previous to his injury, although untrained in the schools, he possessed a well-balanced mind, meaning he didn't go to school, but his mind was well-balanced. In this regard, his mind was radically changed. In fact, it was so changed that those who were close to him described him as no longer Gage. It's like people are saying that this is not the person we know. This is different. Okay. There's a neurologist, Dr. Paul MacLean, who explains things in the following way. But these are things that most of us know. If you go to the next slide, we'll find that his quote, a very important quote that says, so he's commenting on the limbic system versus the frontal lobe, the frontal cortex. He says the limbic lobes regulate emotions that are concerned with the 4 primal or base instincts. Then he lists the base instincts as fight, flight, feed, and reproduction or mating. So what are these limbic lobes? I've tried to highlight them a bit. Just go back to that picture again. You can see there's that area that's highlighted, but we're going to look at more well-labeled diagrams later. So there's a comparison on the next slide that's comparing the limbic versus the prefrontal cortex, which was damaged in Phineas Gage, by the way. So the limbic system drives emotional responses and instinctive decisions, especially under stress. So that's what it's concerned with. In fact, some people have called it the reward center. What the limbic system wants is anything that is going to make you feel good, because it's very focused on dopamine. That's the main neurotransmitter in the limbic system. And we know what dopamine does. I'm sure we've heard of addictions and everything else. By the way, we're going to go into the science of addiction later on as the days go by. The prefrontal cortex, on the other hand, regulates rational thinking, planning, and impulsive control. While the limbic system is influenced by immediate rewards, the prefrontal cortex evaluates long-term consequences and trade-offs. You know, where you say, okay, so the idea here is the limbic system is going to see something to say, you know what, the way it's called, the limbic system is going to tell you in the morning to say, all right, just skip this class. That's the limbic system. It wants that reward of a warm blanket. The prefrontal cortex, on the other hand, is going to say, do you really want a life where they say, she went to Levi and she failed? You know, so the mind is weighing the two, the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. A well-balanced person is such that the prefrontal cortex is able to override the limbic system. That's how we make decisions. That's how you see something you really like, you find a large pizza with all the slices there. The limbic system is telling you to eat all of them. And the prefrontal cortex is telling you, but your siblings have not yet got it. Okay, so it's weighing the long-term consequences. That's the balance that has to be there. And at this point, you can start understanding why Phineas Gage had that type of experience. Because for him, the part now that is able to put things in control was damaged. We can show a diagram now that is just putting everything in perspective. So the cortex has different lobes, the frontal lobe, parietal lobe. They do different things, but the one that's mostly responsible for the actual judgment is the prefrontal cortex, which is right here. And that's why now when you go back to the Bible now, deep into Revelation, there's so much emphasis on the forehead now, even with the mark of the beast and everything else. It has to be there in the very seat of judgment. The limbic system, on the other hand, comprised of the amygdala, hippocampus, the thalamus, and the cingulate gyrus, all those parts. That's the limbic system. So these two have to remain balanced in a well-balanced person, because you can't survive without the limbic system. If you only have the frontal cortex, then you'll be overly logical without any reward and any idea of knowing when to rest and when not to rest, when to relax and when not to relax. But again, if you're only working on the limbic system without the prefrontal cortex, you become what happened to Phineas Gage. That's why the balance has to be there. But what we'll discover is that something similar to what happened to Phineas Gage happens to all of us, except not with physical damage. And that's what we're going to go into later on. Another important concept I want us to establish today is the idea of what is called the supernormal stimulus. Some of these things, as I was researching, were actually quite frightening because they're a bit too heavy. If you're not a Christian, the goal of this series of presentations is to show you the beauty of following Christ. But if you're a Christian who has been lousy in your Christianity, I intend to make it very uncomfortable for you until you take a step further to follow Christ. In the 1970s, that's when the research was published, but the experiments by Dr. Nicholas Tinbergen started somewhere around 1940. He discovered something very interesting that made him coin the term supernormal stimulus. Now we know what a stimulus is, okay? You see something you want to get, okay? Something that, a sensory input into the brain that now elicits an action based on that. In plants, we call them tropisms. So when light strikes, a plant will start going that direction. Okay, you see food, you salivate. Those are stimuli. But what they discovered is that you actually can have what are called supernormal stimuli. What are these supernormal stimuli? A supernormal stimulus is an exaggerated version of a natural trigger that causes a stronger instinctive response than the original. Meaning, you have a normal stimulus that's there. For example, a dog has been conditioned to always follow the whistle of the master. That's a normal conditioned stimulus. Or you see food that has been cooked. You know, the olfactory senses pick up the smell. Then you know that's well-grilled chicken right there. Your eyes cast their gaze on the texture on top, the oils, and how everything is. So the eyes see, the nose smells, everything goes to the brain. The prefrontal cortex goes into the fowls and picks up a fowl of the last chicken you had, and it remembers that what you are seeing, because the eyes don't know. It's a very interesting relay game. The eyes are just like, we found this, and they send it to the prefrontal cortex. I want you to imagine it as a game, you know. We found this, and then the prefrontal cortex is like, oh, let me analyze it. And then it sends a signal to say, that is food that you see. And then a signal is sent to the hand, and then the hand extends and grabs a bite. Then the masseter and all the muscles of the mouth are told to start chewing and everything. But everything happens in a very short period of time. It's amazing. That's why someone said that people travel distances to go and see the pyramids of Giza. You know, they travel to go and see the Victoria Falls. They traveled to go and see the Great Wall. They traveled to see these great mysteries, but they passed by the greatest mystery of all, which is themselves. And I think that's something you should think about, because when David says you are wonderfully and fearfully made, he means it. So that's a supernormal stimulus. What he discovered, I'm going to show you a series of experiments that were conducted to prove this point. So on the next slide, they were trying to, the experiment was initially based on trying to understand the behavior of mating in butterflies. Okay? So it was discovered that male butterflies are attracted to, number one, female butterflies that are brightly colored. Okay? So the more brightly colored it is, the more males it's going to attract. Number two, the larger the spots or on its surface, the more males it's going to attract. That's just how it works in the animal world. And we find that it somehow works for us too. But what they found was that after they made a butterfly out of cardboard, and then they exaggerated the brightness of the spots. So they made it have brighter spots, number one, and the spots were made larger, number two, and the wings were made larger. Guess which one the males preferred? The exaggerated one. They were actually going there and trying to mate with a cardboard butterfly. That's a supernormal stimulus. It's based on a normal stimulus, but it takes it a step further and creates something artificial. And these animals are, deceived into going after that. I'm guessing you started seeing why we've entitled this series The Deception Zone. So that's what they found in butterflies, and it was amazing to see. So they wanted to see if this phenomenon exists anywhere else in the animal kingdom. So the next slide is just showing a number of males flocking around. This one is made of cardboard, the one in the center. And the females are just observing from a distance to say, so this synthetic one has taken our place. That's what they observed in that experiment. But in science, we don't make conclusions on one experiment. So they did the experiment in a different species. This time, they focused on this bird. You can show the next slide. So this bird is a very beautiful bird. It's got that red spot there on the beak. So the idea behind that red spot is, in the animal kingdom, feeding is quite harsh. It's the same thing even for us. When we're young, our parents have to feed us. So what happens with this species is, as the parents go out to forage, the food that they find, they'll pre-digest it, and then they'll bring it closer to the end of the beak, and then the young ones will come in there, peck from there. They'll be sucking it from the beak of the mother, and the red spot there is the guiding point. It's what guides them to know where to peck. I've included the diagram just showing this phenomenon on the next slide. So that's a mother and that's a youngster. It's trying to get food from the mother. So in an effort to try and understand the supernormal stimulus a bit more, they designed an experiment where they got these youngsters, put them together with their mothers, but then they designed artificial beaks. And guess what they did? They made the spot more brighter and larger. Guess which one the young ones preferred? The artificial one. That's a supernormal stimulus, proven in a different species this time. They went a step further. You can show the next slide. And they looked at birds. I'm sure all of us have. At least birds. So they lay their eggs, and then they have to incubate them for a period of how many days? Chickens, 21 days. So during those 21 days, they are quite, they're very sacrificing. So it will go out and forage and eat and just eat enough. But God has put in some very interesting sensors such that it will know when to go back and sit on the egg, so that the temperature variations in the egg will not be very wide. How it does that, only God knows. So what they did is they got this bird and then they designed artificial eggs. They made them larger and then they placed them there. Guess which one most birds preferred to sit on? The larger one. So this phenomenon has been proven times without number in the animal kingdom. There's another picture here showing a different experiment still with birds. So you can see they've placed a larger one there. They've made it, the texture is almost the same and everything. Of course, the picture is explaining other concepts, but we'll just focus on that one. And the birds preferred, at least most of them, to sit on the larger egg. Why am I sharing this? The question is it possible that this thing can exist in the human world as well? Such that certain things we like can be brought to us in an exaggerated fashion and we're going to like them? Because the trick then is you just have to, number one, discover what stimulates the brain. If you can find out what makes the brain move, and number two, create an exaggerated version. Number three, the brain is going to prefer the exaggerated version. Is it possible to find examples like this in the human world? Let's take a little stroll, just comparing how things have changed from way back, maybe 1980, and comparing to our day to day. This is a doll from 1980, okay? She's innocent, you can look at the dress and everything, the hairstyle. We're going to compare this doll to today's doll, and then you help me analyze what has changed. Could it be that we've started preferring artificial things now, like those birds we're seeing? This is the one today. And I think we can compare and contrast and see what has changed. I'll leave that up to your own discretion. You can see the differences. But it's not only with female dolls. Let's consider a male doll from 1980. You can see, humans like muscles and everything. So they're trying to show that, he's shapeless and everything. They're trying to appeal to the senses. But notice just how the appeal has changed when you look at a doll from today. Now, we all know that these are artificial, but we prefer these over those, just like those birds in the experiment. Now, these are mild examples of how easy it is to manipulate the mind into following something that's completely artificial. Let's look at a bit more, more hardcore type of examples. Let's look at social media. What's a supernormal stimulus with social media? Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, what do they offer? Constant micro-validation via likes. Have you ever posted a status and then 2 hours later there was no like? You're like, what's wrong? What supernormal stimulus is there? This is playing on our need. We are social beings. We want validation. There's nothing wrong with that. But the exaggerated version of that is to want likes and positive reviews from people who you never even meet, people who don't even care about you. So social media has found a way of enslaving us in this way. We're going to focus more on social media on day 6, desexualizing the mind. Adverts. These adverts, they exaggerate vivid images, the coloring and everything. As we're going to see later, most of the things they use in adverts are actually things we don't need. But what they do is, the idea behind adverts is switch off the frontal cortex while the person is in the shop, so that the limbic system, the one that wants without caring for any consequences, is the one to make the decision. So while you are there, you'll be bombarded with exaggerated imagery, colors, slogans, music, even sexual cues. We're going to discover how, at some point, psychologists discovered that using the female body in adverts is the best way to grow your business. And then we're going to see how that has affected us. There's emotional manipulation. You can still go back to that one. And what does that do? it makes products appear more desirable than their utility warrants. Have you ever gone, I think a lot of people complain about this. They went to buy one item. They came back with loads of items. In fact, there are so many things I didn't include here. The psychology of how they design the aisle. Children's products are deliberately put on the lower side so that their eyesight is, so that they don't have to look up in case they don't appreciate the colors. They're deliberately put on the lower side. Things that you and I will use are higher so that our eyes can appreciate just how good it looks. Emotional manipulation. That's another example of a supernormal stimulus. We can look at video games. We all crave relevance. We all want to matter. We all want to be heroes. But not everyone can be, a very good, a well-celebrated hero. You know what video games give us? They offer us a chance. Have you ever played any of those adventure games where you're going, slaying giants and everything, and then at the end of the day, you win? That's the normal, stimulus that they are working on. We all want that. But they are exaggerating it now with bright visuals and fast feedback. Whereby in life it will take you 10, 15, 20 years to get your business established. You can do that in a game within 2 hours. Within 2 hours. So fast feedback, that's another emotional manipulation. Escalating rewards, whereby in real life you struggle and work hard, and the only promotion you receive is from a junior officer to someone that's a bit higher. But in games you become the ruler, you become the chief of the kingdom. All those are normal desires that they are manipulating. But what's the cost, especially with games? There's also these infinite levels, artificial goals and immediate gratification. But what is it really robbing you? It's robbing you of your time, and we're going to see how that comes in. We can look at pornography. It's attracting the most basic of instincts. The things that wire us, our need for sexuality. And then it gets that and now brings extreme, varied, and on-demand sexual stimulation. It features unnaturally idealized partners with everything exaggerated. On Desexualizing the Mind and other days, we are going to discover how this is a very big trap. There's hardcore pornography right there on the top, but there are a lot of soft-core ideas here, whereby the ideal standard of beauty has been so changed that it's impossible to reach that standard. And as a result, both men and women are enslaved. How? Men are enslaved because, like those butterflies, they are trying to mate with cardboard females. Females that don't exist in real life. Everything exaggerated. And to a young female who is innocent and just going about life, what is it telling her? You're not good enough. You have to do this. And therefore you start seeing breast implants and hip implants and skin lightening and all that. That's a supernormal stimulus. And what's even more deadly with pornography is that it bypasses courtship. You know how hard it is to follow someone and then receive no's and then you have to go back and, every day you're saying, hey, 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 as if you're composing a song for them. It's tricky. It's really tricky, But this one offers you an escape route. It's right there every time, whenever you need it, wherever you need it. And you know what? There's no need for intimacy. You don't need to know all their deepest secrets. You don't have to face the days when your partner is broken, he doesn't know what to do. You can always get an on-demand partner who is there. And there are no consequences. In real life, there are consequences to these things. There are STIs, pregnancy, there's all sorts of things. But here, there's nothing. As a result, like those little, chicks that were food into baking on an artificial bake, same thing is happening to us in different ways. So really, the idea of the supernatural stimulus is there. And yet you would wonder, why aren't these ideas being circulated? Why don't we know about these things? A lot of people have tried to quit some of these addictions. Another one that perhaps most of us can relate to is the next one, junk food. It's another basic desire. Have you ever seen, passed by a place where your favorite food is being cooked? Like you're just passing, and unfortunately on that day, you're on call and you are broke. so you've not had anything, and your stomach has been singing you a song with that bass tone that comes every time. Like it's been there, and then you pass through a place like that. Junk food is engineered to be hyper palatable. There's no fiber, the stomach doesn't have to struggle to extract cellulose and other things. And it combines sugar and salt. We're going to, on the day when we'll be discussing the effect of food on the mind, which is day 3 or day 4, I have to confirm. We are going to discover how these natural tastes that we all like have been exaggerated to hook us, to make us dependent on these unnatural foods. As a result, when you eat, the moment it touches your taste buds, it overstimulates them. Such that when you see, normal shima with, roller meal or sorghum versus crisps, it's a very easy decision for your mind to make. Or maybe crisps are too far-fetched. Let me use fries. So there are fries there, or some hungry lion, but it's well done. Like everything is proper, or some Debonair's pizza. Like you're having a good time. It's a very easy decision for your mind to choose. Like it's instant. Why? Because you started going to a level like Phineas Gage. There's been no physical damage on your prefrontal cortex, but it's been redesigned such that the limbic system has become way too strong that you cannot control anything. As a result, when you go back and you read the Bible, you see a discrepancy between these people, like the likes of Joseph, who are described to have run away from Potiphar's wife, and it's an unrealistic idea in your life. Or, you are reading how these people were fasting 3 days, and like, 3 days? 3 days, no fries. Like how will I even survive? Because your mind has been rewired. And I want you to be thinking about this now when we get to let the mind of Christ be in you. And we see how far we are from that state. So junk food is another example. If you look at just the amount, this is a very good one. You can see how what's frustrating about this is that it's been proven, you can go and do researches on it, especially with big fast food companies like KFC and McDonald's. The bread, the bun, the meat they put there, sometimes it's been proven to be actually made of plastic. Like plastic that is rubbery so that it gives that good texture, because it's just for the camera. The only thing they want is for you to go there and buy the product. This is a very good example of a supernormal stimulus. Now, when we go back to that principle of neuroplasticity, what we find is that the brain has the ability to reorganize itself. Meaning, what you do most of the time sort of creates a feedback loop where it reinforces that idea. If we are going to use a more clear example, if you picture the brain as a system of neurons, it's wired like that. Every time you do an activity, if it's a new activity, a new pathway is created for it. It's like a new folder has been opened. When you do that again, that pathway is made stronger. It thickens and it elongates. Okay? So the more you repeat that, the more your brain is told that this is a good idea. So that is the idea of neuroplasticity. But what this also offers, neuroplasticity, explains why it's possible for an event like that of Paul to be, to be a realistic thing in our life. to change from a murdering rabbi to a gospel preaching servant of the Lord? Because of neuroplasticity. This change is possible to change from bad to good. It's also possible to change from good to bad. As a result, it helps us explain, number one, why we have found ourselves doing things we never even imagined we could do, because we are slowly being changed. And what I really like is it proves one of the most fundamental principles, at least in the Adventist world, that by beholding we do what? We become changed. Because the more you behold, the more you do, the more you become changed. Some of the things we've discussed may have been a bit depressing, but this offers hope to say that we can change. Now, let's go back now to the writings. After looking at the science, we can now go back to the writings with full confidence that what the writings have been telling us is true. When we read Adventist Acts of the Apostles 5:18, paragraph 2, it says, those who would not fall a prey to Satan's devices must guard well the avenues of the soul. They must avoid reading, seeing, or hearing that which will suggest what? Impure thoughts. And I think after what we've learned today, this text is a walk-off. But how many impure thoughts are we bombarded with every day? Through music, that's why we tackle music. Through sports, that's why we tackle sports. Through food, as innocent as it may be, that's why we are going to tackle that as well. When you go to Romans, it says, for to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Why is it death to be carnally minded? I think after this, we can see why. Because when you are carnally minded, your limbic system has taken over. You cannot reason. And what does the God of the Bible tell us? Come now, let us do what? Reason together. But the reasoning capability has been shattered because of repeated use of some of these things. Romans 8:7 continues to say, because the carnal mind is enmity against God. Why is it enmity? Because right from the start, our God is a God of reason. He respects reason so much. That's why a good and mature Christian is not impulsive. He's not one who does things without thinking. Of course, as we join the Christian faith when we're young in the faith, we may have those ideas, but as we mature, that soberness starts coming in. And for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be. Now, Paul is offering an impossibility here. He's saying a carnal mind cannot be subject to the law of God. Like it's impossible for a carnal mind to follow God. Why? I think we have answered the reason to that. When we continue with paragraph 2 of Acts of the Apostles, it reads, the mind must not be left to dwell at random upon every subject that the enemy of souls may suggest. The heart must be faithfully sentinel. In other words, it must be faithfully guarded, or evils within will awaken which evils? Evils without will awaken evils within. And the soul will wander in darkness. Remember, in sin we are conceived. Our hearts are evil by nature. It's easy for the enemy then to awaken the evils that are already waiting in us. That's why Sister White here says, the mind must not be left to dwell at random. And this is the biggest problem with unguided meditation. You know, where you just sit down, free your mind of everything and let it wander. It does a lot of good to the mind in terms of calming it. But if you let it wander anywhere now, it can easily land on very deadly subjects. And that's why those types of meditation, the Bible tells us to meditate, but we must meditate on what? The Word of God. Not to leave it wandering, because we know that these evils without will awaken evils within. We continue with Testimonies, Volume 1, page 496, paragraph 1. Now, this one is interesting because after learning about the supernormal stimulus, we will understand why this is the case. Satan knows what organs to do what? To excite in order to animate, engross, and charm the mind so that Christ is not what? Is not desired. If we read this before all the evidence, it would have been, something like speculation. But now we can see Meaning, Satan is capable of making us not want Christ. He is capable of making us not desire Christ by frying the frontal cortex, the one that makes decisions. And how does he do that? So many ways. You know, music, hip hop with a loud beat, it's been blasting the entire day, then you've added the UCO final, and then you've continued with movies that suggest very wrong things. Everything is doing one thing in its own way. It's making sure that certain organs, if we go back to this, what organs then does Satan have to excite in order to make the mind not desire Christ? It's a limbic system. Once that goes beyond, and this is why it's interesting. If we go back to the case of Phineas Gage, what practically happened then is he became an animal. Because the very thing that distinguishes a human being from other animals was taken away from him. As a result, he was behaving like a dog, like a chimp, like any animal that you can imagine. That's why when you go to the Bible now, it even uses strong terms. Dumb dogs that cannot bark, as it's trying to describe preachers who have sold the gospel of Jesus Christ. It continues to say, okay, there are some words here that I think we should explain. So he knows which organs to animate. To animate is you add fuel to them, make them start beating faster, and to engross you, completely cover them in whatever you want, and charm. To charm them is to encourage them, to give them support, so that the mind does not require Christ. The spiritual longings of the soul. So what happens now afterwards is that the spiritual longings of the soul for divine knowledge, for a growth in grace, are wanting. So when this happens, that desire to say, Lord, I want to be whiter than snow, the mind will be like this type of mind, like, whiter than snow, what does that even mean? I'm having a good life now. Because those spiritual longings have been quenched from the mind. That is what the prophet of the Lord is trying to communicate to us. What solution then does the Bible give? Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, if there be any virtue, and by now we know why Paul used these words. If there's any virtue in them, and if there be any praise, do what? Think on these things. That's why now meditating on the word of God is important, because it's growing the mind to love the things of the Lord. The last thing I will say is, please take good care of your mind. It's God's gift to you, and it's greater than any gift. It's the center of everything. And I pray you'll join us tomorrow as we uncover more things about music. Thank you. Amen.
Okay, I hope you guys have enjoyed just like I have enjoyed. Yeah, do we have any visitors today? Aveni, Venzu, Veni, Vaeni. Any visitors? So tomorrow we should all invite somebody, like a roommate or let's come with people, so at least they should also listen to the good things that we're listening to today. So in closing, we'll all rise up and sing our theme song, stand 1 and 2. Then we'll have a closing prayer from Brother Andrew.